In the unforgiving wilderness of Montana, where winter shows no mercy, a broken man clutches his infant daughter in a dilapidated cabin. Elias Hart, once celebrated for capturing humanity's defining moments through his lens, now can barely keep himself alive. His wife's death has left him a shell of who he was, surviving on scraps while his baby daughter weakens by the day. When Clara Monroe, a small-town teacher carrying her own deep wounds, discovers them nearly frozen to death, she makes a choice that will alter all their lives forever. As she nurses them back to health, something unexpected begins to stir in her heart, a second chance at the maternal love she thought she'd lost forever. But can two souls, shattered by their past losses, learn to trust in love again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning bell at Pinecrest Elementary hadn't changed in 20 years. Clara Monroe appreciated that consistency as she arranged the day's mathematics worksheets on each small desk, her fingers lingering on the smooth paper. Outside her second-floor classroom window, Montana's November painted the world in watercolor grays and whites, the kind of morning that reminded her why she'd chosen this remote corner of the country to rebuild her life. "Good morning, Miss Monroe," Emily Watson's cheerful voice carried across the empty classroom. Always first to arrive, Emily reminded Clara of herself at that age, eager, bright-eyed, full of questions about everything. Clara forced herself to smile, though her heart ached at the sight of Emily's rounded belly beneath her winter coat. The girl was 7 months along with what would have been her little sister. "Morning, sweetheart. How about helping me set up the science corner?" Clara's voice remained steady, practiced. She'd learned to navigate these moments, these unexpected reminders of what she'd lost. Her teaching certificate, framed on the wall behind her desk, caught the weak morning light. 5 years of training, another 7 of experience, yet nothing had prepared her for teaching through grief. The rest of her students trickled in as snow began to fall outside, each bringing gusts of cold air and childhood chatter. Clara moved among them with gentle efficiency, helping with mittens and bootlaces, settling minor disputes over pencils and favorite seats. This was her sanctuary now. This classroom with its alphabet charts and multiplication tables, its globe that spun endless possibilities, its shelves of books promising adventures far from her own thoughts. During morning reading, Clara's hand unconsciously drifted to her abdomen, a habit she hadn't been able to break in the 18 months since the stillbirth. Her marriage hadn't survived that loss. David couldn't understand why she needed to leave Seattle, why she'd chosen this small town where no one knew her story. He'd wanted to try again right away, as if another baby could simply replace the daughter they'd lost. As if Clara's body hadn't become a battlefield of grief and medical interventions. The children's voices washed over her as they took turns reading about a family of bears preparing for winter. Clara checked the weather app on her phone during their independent work time, another storm system moving in, worse than predicted. She'd need to stock up on supplies after school, maybe finally fix that drafty window in her rental cottage. "Ms. Monroe?" Tommy raised his hand, his forehead wrinkled with concern. "Is it true that bears can sleep all winter without eating?" Clara welcomed the distraction, launching into an explanation of hibernation. This was where she felt most herself. Now, teaching, sharing knowledge, nurturing young minds. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she spent her days caring for other people's children, while her own dreams of motherhood lay buried in a Seattle cemetery. The afternoon brought art, glass, and Clara helped her students create winter landscapes with cotton balls and blue construction paper. She praised their work, each unique vision of snow and sky, while her own thoughts drifted to the ultrasound picture still tucked in her bedside drawer. Her daughter had looked like a sleeping angel, perfect in every way except for the silence, where a heartbeat should have been. As the final bell approached, Clara noticed the snow falling more heavily now. The local weather service had issued a winter storm warning for the weekend. She made sure each child was bundled up properly before leaving, watching from her classroom door as they joined the stream of students heading for buses and waiting parents. In the quiet of her empty classroom, Clara gathered her things, checking twice to ensure she had enough groceries at home to weather the coming storm. The forecast mentioned possible power outages, and her little cottage on the outskirts of town was particularly vulnerable to winter's fury. She'd learned quickly that Montana winters demanded respect and preparation. Driving home through the thickening snow, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was just the weight of another holiday season approaching, her second without David, her second carrying this hollow space where motherhood should have been. She turned up the heat in her car and gripped the steering wheel tighter, reminding herself that she'd chosen this life, this fresh start in a place where winter's silence matched her own. Clara's headlights cut through the swirling snow, barely, illuminating 10 feet ahead on the narrow mountain road. The storm had intensified faster than predicted, transforming her usual 20-minute drive home into a white-knuckled journey through near-whiteout conditions. She'd stayed late at school preparing for next week's science fair, a decision she now regretted as darkness settled over the Montana wilderness. A flash of movement caught her eye, something dark against the endless white. Clara slowed her SUV, squinting through the passenger window. There, almost hidden among the trees, stood what appeared to be a cabin. Smoke rose from its chimney, but something seemed wrong about the thin, sporadic wisps disappearing into the storm. Common sense told her to keep driving. She was only 3 miles from home, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. But that smoke. It reminded her of her father's warnings about dangerous flue fires, about people who didn't make it through their first Montana winter. Clara pulled over, wrestling with her conscience. The cabin wasn't visible from the main road in normal conditions. She'd driven this route hundreds of times and never noticed it. The storm was her only reason for spotting it now, the headlights catching its dark shape at just the right angle. She grabbed her emergency kit from the trunk. Flashlight, first aid supplies, emergency blankets. The wind cut through her wool coat as she trudged through knee-deep snow toward the cabin. Up close, the building looked worse than she'd imagined. The roof sagged dangerously, and gaps between the logs leaked precious heat into the frigid air. Clara's knock echoed hollowly. No response. She tried again, louder this time, her worry growing. The door shifted slightly under her hand. Unlocked. "Hello? Is anyone here? I'm a local resident, just checking to make sure everything's okay." The door creaked open to darkness and cold that rivaled the outside air. Clara's flashlight beam revealed a scene that stopped her breath. A man huddled in the corner, clutching something to his chest. His eyes, when they met hers, held the wild look of someone who'd forgotten how to trust the world. "Stay back," he rasped, turning slightly to shield his bundle. That's when Clara heard it, the weakest cry she'd ever heard from a baby. "Oh, God," she whispered, maternal instinct overriding caution. She approached slowly, hands raised. "Please. I'm here to help. I have a car. We need to get you both out of here." The man tried to stand but collapsed back against the wall. In the flashlight's beam, Clara could see his lips were blue, his fingers blackened with early frostbite where they clutched a dirty blanket around the infant. The cabin held no warmth, no supplies she could see, just a few pieces of broken furniture and the remains of what looked like a final piece of firewood smoking in the hearth. "I'm Clara Monroe. I teach at the elementary school in town," she kept, her voice soft, steady, the same tone she used with frightened children. "That baby needs medical attention. Please, let me help you." Something in her voice must have reached him. His grip on the baby loosened slightly, and Clara caught a glimpse of a tiny face, eyes closed, cheeks too pale. "My daughter," he managed. "Grace." Clara inched closer, pulling an emergency blanket from her kit. "I'm going to wrap this around both of you, and then we're going to my car. The hospital is 20 minutes away. What's your name?" "Elias." he whispered, allowing her to tuck the blanket around them. Elias' heart. It took all of Clara's strength to help him up, to guide both, father and daughter, through the deepening snow to her vehicle. As she cranked the heat and called ahead to the emergency room, she caught Elias watching her in the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with equal parts fear and desperate hope. The baby stirred weakly against his chest, and Clara pressed the accelerator harder, praying she hadn't found them too late. The hospital waiting room clock ticked past midnight as Elias turned his wedding ring around his finger, a nervous habit he'd developed in the 4 months since Sarah's death. Down the hall, doctors were treating his daughter for hypothermia and malnutrition while he sat here useless, blocked from her room, until his own frostbitten hands had been treated. The teacher, Clara, sat quietly beside him, her presence both comforting and unsettling. She hadn't left since bringing them in, handling the paperwork he could barely focus on, speaking with doctors in the calm, capable way he used to manage before everything fell apart. "Your hands will heal," she said softly, noticing his attention. "On the bandages. The doctor said there's no permanent damage." Elias nodded, his throat tight. His hands had been his life once. The same fingers now wrapped in sterile gauze had adjusted camera lenses in war zones, captured presidential handshakes, frozen moments of both triumph and devastation for the world to witness. National Geographic, Time, Reuters, they'd all displayed his work. Photos that make the world hold its breath, his editor used to say, but no camera had been present for his own moment of devastation. No one had documented the instant when Sarah's car hit the black ice, when their perfect life spun out of control at 70 miles per hour. He'd been in Syria then, photographing refugee children while his 8 months pregnant wife drove home from her final prenatal appointment. The doctors had saved Grace through an emergency C-section, but Sarah never opened her eyes again. The brain damage was too severe. He'd flown home to find his daughter in the NICU and his wife on life support. Her body kept breathing just long enough to say goodbye. "Mr. Hart," a nurse appeared with a clipboard. "Your daughter's pediatrician would like to speak with you." Elias stood too quickly, swaying as exhaustion and medication made the room spin. Clara's hand steadied his elbow, and he didn't shake it off. The pediatrician waited in a small consultation room, her expression carefully neutral. "Grace is responding well to treatment," she began, "but I'm concerned about her overall condition. She's severely underweight for a 4-month-old. Can you tell me about her feeding schedule?" The questions came rapidly after that. Immunization records, regular checkups, proper formula. Elias's answers grew increasingly inadequate as the full weight of his failure pressed down on him. He'd had everything prepared before Sarah died. A college fund started, the nursery painted soft yellow, a pediatrician selected. But after, he couldn't bear their Seattle home, couldn't face the sympathetic looks, couldn't stop seeing Sarah in every corner. He'd loaded Grace into the car one night, driving aimlessly east until the mountains swallowed them. The cabin had belonged to his grandfather, abandoned for decades but still standing. He'd convinced himself they could hide there until the pain stopped, until he figured out how to be a father without Sarah showing him the way. "Mr. Hart," the pediatrician's voice softened. "I understand you're grieving, but Grace needs stability, proper care. I'm obligated to report this to social services." The word "report" sent a surge of panic through him. "I can do better," he said hoarsely. "I will do better. Please, she's all I have left." "Perhaps," Clara spoke for the first time since entering the room, "there's a middle ground. I live just outside town. I have a spare room. If Mr. Hart is willing to accept help, to work with social services voluntarily." She looked at Elias. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we can't do everything alone." Elias stared at this stranger who'd saved his daughter's life, who was now offering them a lifeline he didn't deserve. The weight of his wedding ring seemed to double. Sarah would be horrified at what he'd become, at how close he'd come to destroying the precious life they'd created together. Through the consultation room window, he could see Grace in the pediatric unit, tiny under the warming lights. But her color already better than it had been in weeks. His camera bag still sat in the cabin, gathering dust, his last connection to the man he used to be. The man Sarah had loved. The man who needed to find his way back. For Grace's sake, I want to do better, he whispered, and for the first time since Sarah's death the words felt like more than empty promises. I have to do better. Clara nodded, a look of understanding passing between them, two people who knew what it meant to rebuild from ashes. Outside, the storm raged on, but in this moment, something shifted. A path forward, narrow and uncertain, but a path nonetheless. The spare room in Clara's cottage smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. She'd stayed up late the night before, moving her boxes of teaching supplies to the basement, making space for the portable crib the hospital social worker had provided. Now, watching Elias settle Grace into it, she fought the urge to hover, to adjust the blanket, to check the temperature one more time. The pediatrician gave her a clean bill of health, she reminded herself, as much as Elias. She's gaining weight right on schedule. 2 weeks had passed since that stormy night. Grace's medical file grew thicker with each visit. Weight charts, vaccination records, developmental assessments. Each positive note felt like a small victory, marking their slow climb back toward normal. Elias moved differently now that his hands had healed, with the deliberate grace of someone relearning their own body. He'd spent hours in physical therapy, exercising his fingers, preparing for the day he could hold a camera again. Clara had caught him the night before, practicing with an empty paper towel roll, adjusting imaginary settings with bandage-free. Fingers? I should get dinner started, Clara said, backing toward the door. She'd learned to telegraph her movements, to make noise before entering rooms. Elias still startled easily, like a wild animal unused to domestic spaces. In the kitchen, she pulled out ingredients for soup, something simple, nourishing. The social worker's words echoed in her head. Give them routine, stability. But don't forget to take care of yourself. Easier said than done when every cry from Grace sent her running, when each of Elias's nightmares pierced the thin walls between their rooms. The sound of running water made her look up. Elias stood in the kitchen doorway, uncertainty written in every line of his body. I thought, maybe I could help. I used to cook before. Clara nodded, sliding the carrots and cutting board toward him. They worked in comfortable silence, the routine of chopping vegetables creating its own kind of therapy. Grace slept soundly in her crib, monitored by the baby camera Clara had installed, another gift from the hospital staff who'd taken a special interest in their case. Sarah loved cooking, Elias said suddenly, his knife pausing over an onion. She made these incredible holiday meals. Last Thanksgiving she was already 7 months pregnant, but she insisted on doing everything herself. Said Grace needed to learn her family recipes from the inside out. Clara kept stirring the broth, giving him space to continue or stop. These moments came more frequently now, small shares of memory, like testing ice to see if it would hold. I've been thinking about my camera bag, he continued. It's still at the cabin. My whole career, sitting in that dark corner. We could get it, Clara offered. When you're ready. The road's clear now. The knife resumed its steady rhythm. Grace needs new clothes soon. She's outgrowing everything the hospital gave us. Clara recognized the deflection, but didn't push. There's a good children's store in town. We could go tomorrow, after my last parent-teacher conference. Elias nodded, then gestured to a spot of soup that had bubbled over. It's boiling. They fell back into their dance of careful movements and unspoken understanding. Clara had expected awkwardness, living with a virtual stranger and his baby. Instead, she found herself settling into new patterns, her teacher's instinct for structure blending with Elias's gradual re-emergence into the world. After dinner, she graded papers, while Elias gave Grace her bath. His deep voice carried down. the hall, explaining the process to his daughter as if she were his most important photography client. Now we check the water temperature, just like metering the light. Everything has to be perfect for my best girl. Clara's red pen paused over Tommy's creative writing assignment. She'd gotten used to working through Grace's crying jags, through Elias's silent periods. But this gentle fatherhood emerging from the ashes of grief, caught her off guard every time. The pediatrician's latest report sat on her desk, full of promising numbers and cautious optimism. Grace was thriving, Elias was healing, and Clara was remembering how it felt to have purpose beyond her classroom walls, to build something new from broken pieces. Later, after Grace's evening feeding, Clara found Elias standing at the kitchen window, staring at the star-filled Montana sky. "Thank you," he said quietly, not turning around, "for everything." She stood beside him, watching their reflections in the glass. Two people and a baby, looking less like refugees from their own lives with each passing day. Outside, the first signs of spring began to soften winter's edges, promising change, growth, possibility. The memory card felt impossibly small in Elias's palm, a tiny rectangle containing the last photos he'd ever taken. Clara watched him turn it over and over, his fingers tracing its edges as they sat in her living room, the afternoon sun painting long shadows across the floor. They'd retrieved his camera bag from the cabin that morning, an expedition that had left them both quietly shaken by the reality of how close he and Grace had come to tragedy. "I can't remember what's on it," he admitted, voice rough. "The last few weeks in Syria, then the flight home after the accident. I kept shooting, even then. Like somehow if I just kept working, kept focusing, everything else would make sense." Grace lay on her playmat nearby, batting at hanging toys with growing coordination. Her baby giggles filled the space between their words, a reminder of life moving forward despite the weight of the past. "We don't have to look at them now," Clara said softly. Her laptop sat closed on the coffee table, ready but not demanding. She'd learned to read Elias's moods over the past month, to recognize when he needed pushing and when he needed patience. He shook his head, squaring his shoulders. "No, I want to. I need to." He handed her the card, as if afraid he might change his mind if he held it too long. Would you look with me?" Clara inserted the card into her laptop, and together they watched as thumbnails populated the screen. The first images were what she'd expected from a world-renowned photojournalist: stark, powerful shots of refugee camps, children playing in rubble, hope blooming in impossible places. Elias narrated in short bursts, names and dates and stories tumbling out as if he'd been holding them back for too long. Then the style changed abruptly. The composed photographer's eye gave way to frantic, almost desperate shots. Airport terminals, hospital corridors, Sarah's face, peaceful in death, photographed again and again from slightly different angles, as if he'd been trying to capture some sign of life the doctors had missed. "Oh, Elias," Clara whispered, reaching for his hand before she could stop herself. To her surprise, he gripped back, his fingers intertwining with hers as they stared at the screen. "I thought if I just kept shooting, kept documenting, I could maintain some kind of control," he said. "Professional distance, you know. But I couldn't find the right angle to make it make sense, to make it hurt less." Grace chose that moment to let out a particularly delighted squeal, drawing their attention. She had rolled onto her stomach, a new skill, and was reaching determinedly for a stuffed elephant just beyond her grasp. Without discussing it, they both moved to the floor, Clara adjusting the toy closer while Elias encouraged his daughter with gentle words. "She has Sarah's determination," he said, watching Grace finally grab the elephant's trunk. "And her smile, God, that smile." He pulled out his phone, its camera a poor substitute for his professional gear, but his photographer's instinct still true as he captured Grace's moment of triumph. Clara felt the familiar ache in her chest, not as sharp now, but present. She thought of her own hospital photos, tucked away in a box she hadn't opened since moving to Montana. The tiny footprints, the lock of dark hair, the only tangible proof that her daughter had existed at all. "I've been thinking," Elias said, still focused on Grace, but his free hand finding Clara's again, about taking portraits again, small stuff, local work. The school secretary mentioned they need someone for class photos next month. Clara's heart stumbled. This was the first time. He'd talked about returning to photography, to any kind of public life. "The kids would love that, and you'd be amazing at it. Would you help me?" he asked. "Just be there? I'm not sure I remember how to interact with people normally anymore." "Of course," she said, squeezing his hand. "That's what friends are for." The word felt insufficient, even as she said it. Friends didn't memorize each other's nightmares, didn't know the exact temperature that soothed each other's grief, didn't share the kind of silence that had grown between them. Comfortable, understanding, increasingly electric with unspoken possibility. As if sensing the moment's importance, Grace rolled back over, reaching not for her toys, but for both of them, her tiny fingers grasping at the air. Together, they leaned in, creating a circle of warmth against the lingering chill of their separate losses. Outside, the last patches of snow were finally melting, revealing the first green shoots of spring. The hospital bracelet had faded to a dull pink, its edges soft from countless times Clara had run her fingers over the printed text. Lucy Monroe, it read, though her daughter had never drawn breath to hear the name spoken. Clara sat on her bedroom floor, surrounded by the contents of the box she'd finally found the courage to open. Down the hall, she could hear Elias singing Grace to sleep, his deep voice carrying the same lullaby he sang every night. The sound anchored her as she sifted through memories she'd kept locked away for 18 months. The tiny knit hat that had never been worn, the ultrasound photos tracking Lucy's perfect development until that final, silent appointment. The sympathy cards she'd never answered. A gentle knock at her door made her look up. Elias stood in the doorway, hesitating at the threshold of her private grief. "Grace is asleep," he said softly. I thought you might want company." Clara wiped her eyes, surprisingly calm despite the evidence of her loss spread around her. "I used to talk to her," she admitted. "Every night I'd tell Lucy about my day, about the names David and I were considering, about the nursery colors we couldn't agree on. Yellow or mint green. It seemed so important then." Elias sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He picked up the bracelet, handling it with the same reverence he showed his camera equipment. "What made you choose Lucy?" "It was my grandmother's name. She taught third grade for 40 years, inspired me to become a teacher." Clara leaned slightly into his warmth. "David wanted to name her after his mother, Margaret. We never got the chance to settle the argument." "Tell me about that day," Elias said quietly, "if you want to." Clara had never told anyone the whole story, not even her therapist back in Seattle. But here, in the gentle darkness of her room, with Grace's soft breathing coming through the baby monitor, the words finally came. It was a routine checkup. 36 weeks, everything perfect. I was already having Braxton Hicks contractions, so excited to meet her. The nurse took longer than usual with the heartbeat monitor. She kept moving it around, smiling that professional smile that's supposed to keep you calm. Then the doctor came in, and I knew. I knew before she said anything. She picked up the ultrasound photo from that day. Lucy in profile, one tiny. Hand raised as if waving goodbye. They called it a cord accident, just one of those things that happen sometimes, they said. No one's fault, but David, he couldn't handle it, couldn't handle me after. I was supposed to just move on, try again, like Lucy had never existed. Elias's arms slipped around her shoulders, and Clara realized she was shaking. The hospital gave me this memory box. Footprints, handprints, photos. David said it was morbid to keep them, but they're all I have of her. All the proof that she was real, that I was her mother, even if only for 36 weeks. You're still her mother. Elias said firmly. Just like I'm still Sarah's husband, even though time doesn't change that. Doesn't make it less real, Clara. Turned into his embrace then, allowing herself to be held as the tears finally came. She cried for Lucy, for the life she'd planned, for the marriage that couldn't survive such devastating loss, and beneath it all, she cried for the unexpected gift of being understood, of sharing this burden with someone who knew its exact weight. I was so afraid, she whispered against his shirt, when I found you and Grace in that cabin. The thought of another baby dying, of being too late to help, but she lived. She's thriving. Sometimes I watch her sleep and think about how Lucy would be walking now, talking, asking for stories. Elias stroked her hair, his touch gentle but sure. Grace needs you, he said. I need you, not as a replacement for Lucy, but because of who you are. Someone who knows how precious life is, how fragile. Someone who chose to help strangers even though it meant facing your own pain. Clara pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes in the dim light. The distance between them seemed to shrink, charged with possibility and fear and healing. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away tears. I'm not ready, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant for this moment or for letting go of her grief. Neither am I, he admitted. But maybe we don't have to be ready. Maybe we just have to be willing to try. From the baby monitor came Grace's soft sighs, a counterpoint to their shared heartbeats. Clara reached for the hospital bracelet, running her fingers over Lucy's name one more time before carefully placing it back in the memory box. Not to forget, but to make room for whatever this new chapter might bring. The envelope from National Geographic lay unopened on Clara's kitchen table, its yellow border a splash of color against the morning's grey light. Elias stared at it as if it might explode, his coffee growing cold between his hands. His old editor had tracked him down, probably through the local photography work he'd started doing. Glass photos had led to family portraits, then a spread in the town newspaper about the spring festival. You don't have to open it, Clara said, bouncing Grace on her hip as she prepared the baby's morning bottle. At 6 months, Grace was thriving, her cherub cheeks and bright eyes erasing the last traces of those desperate cabin days. It's an assignment, Elias said, his voice hollow. Dave only sends personal letters for big stories. Syrian refugees relocating to Montana. 6 months of documentation following 3 families. His fingers traced the torn corner of the envelope, not quite ready to reveal its contents. It's exactly the kind of story I used to live for. Clara felt her heart constrict. 6 months. He'd be gone for 6 months, just like before. Just like when Sarah... She pushed the thought away, focusing on measuring formula into warm water. This wasn't about her fears. This was about Elias finding his way back to himself. When would it start? She asked, keeping her voice steady. That's just it. He finally pulled the letter free. It's already started. Dave's been trying to reach me for weeks. The families arrived last month. If I don't begin immediately, they'll assign someone else. Grace squirmed, reaching for her father. Clara handed her over automatically, watching as Elias cradled his daughter with the same care he showed his cameras. He'd learned to do both at once, hold Grace and shoot, changing lenses one-handed, never missing a moment of her growth. You should take it, Clara said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It's perfect for you, local but meaningful, and you wouldn't have to travel far. Elias looked up sharply. You think I should? Why wouldn't I? Because... He stood abruptly, setting Grace in her high chair. Because we're finally finding our rhythm here. Because Grace needs stability. Because of Sarah? Clara's voice was gentle, but Elias flinched as if she'd shouted, I was in Syria when she died. The words exploded out of him. Taking pictures of other people's tragedies, while my own wife drove herself to a doctor's appointment in a snowstorm. I chose the story over her, over us, and she died alone. Elias, no. He grabbed his camera bag from the counter, yanking out his latest work, portraits of town life, school events, birthday parties. The photos scattered across the table. This is safe. Small stories. Home every night. No more missed calls. No more... His voice broke. No more choosing wrong. Clara moved to him slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. Sarah's death wasn't a punishment for your career choices. It wasn't because you chose wrong. It was a tragic accident. Was it? He laughed bitterly. Tell that to Grace. Tell her why she'll never know her mother's voice, her smile, the way she sang off-key while cooking. Tell her it was worth it for her father to chase stories around the world instead of being there when it mattered. Grace began to cry, startled by the unfamiliar tension in her father's voice. Clara reached for her, but Elias was faster, scooping up his daughter and holding her close. The fight seemed to drain out of him as Grace's tiny hands patted his face. I can't lose anyone else, he whispered. I can't risk it. Clara touched his arm, feeling the tremors running through him. What about the risk of losing yourself? The person Sarah fell in love with, the artist who showed the world its own heart? She gestured to the scattered photos. These are beautiful, Elias, but they're safe. And the man I've come to know these past months isn't meant to play it safe. There, eyes met over Grace's dark curls. Something electric passed between them, something that had been building since that first night in the hospital. Clara found herself swaying closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his gaze. The man you've come to know, he echoed softly. Yes. Her hand moved from his arm to his chest, feeling his heartbeat race beneath her palm. The man who's teaching his daughter to see beauty in everything. The man who's helping me remember how to hope. She took a shaky breath. The man I'm falling in love with, even though it terrifies me. The confession hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Grace reached out, grabbing Clara's necklace with perfect baby timing, pulling them closer together until their foreheads touched. I can't be that man again, Elias breathed. The one who leaves. Then don't be, Clara whispered. Be the man who stays, who tells the stories that need telling, who comes home every night to his daughter, to us, the first Christmas ornament. Clara bought for Grace, caught the morning light, sending rainbow prisms dancing across the kitchen walls. It was a simple silver star with the baby's name and date engraved beneath. Not her birth date, but the day Elias had agreed to take the National Geographic assignment with one condition, that he could document the refugee family's integration into their community while based at home, with Clara and Grace. I think she's trying to say star, Clara said, watching Grace point at the light display with obvious delight. The baby's vocabulary consisted mainly of Dada and Baba, so far, but her comprehension grew daily. Already developing an eye for light and composition, Elias replied, adjusting his camera settings one-handed while spooning pureed sweet potatoes with the other. Just like her old man. The easy domesticity of the moment struck Clara suddenly. How natural it felt to be here, the three of them sharing breakfast on a sunny December morning. The past 2 weeks since their confrontation over the assignment had brought subtle but profound changes. Shared glances held longer, casual touches lingered, and the space between them seemed charged with possibility. Elias had spent yesterday photographing one of the refugee families decorating their first American Christmas tree, capturing the wonder on the children's faces as they hung ornaments and tinsel. He'd come home quiet, thoughtful, and spent an hour hanging lights around their own windows, while Clara and Grace watched from the warmth of the living room. I've been thinking, he said now, setting down the camera to focus fully on Grace's breakfast. About the holidays, about traditions. Clara's heart skipped. They hadn't discussed what this newfound closeness meant for celebrations, for their future. What kind of traditions? Sarah's family always did Christmas Eve dinner. Formal affair, everyone dressed up. He smiled softly at the memory, and Clara felt a surge of gratitude that he could now speak of Sarah without drowning in grief. But I was thinking, maybe we could start our own tradition, something simple, just the three of us. The way he said it, the three of us, made Clara's throat tight with emotion. She busied herself wiping sweet potato from Grace's chin, buying time to steady her voice. I'd like that. My family never had fixed traditions after my grandmother died. It might be nice to build something new. Something new, Elias echoed, his hand finding hers across the table. These touches came more frequently now, each one a small act of courage. Clara, I know we haven't really talked about what's happening between us. Grace chose that moment to smack her hands in the sweet potatoes, sending orange splatters across the table. They both laughed, the serious conversation momentarily derailed by the realities of life with a 6-month-old. As they cleaned up together, Clara felt the words that had been building in her heart for weeks. I'm not afraid anymore, she said, quietly, rinsing Grace's hands under warm water while Elias held her steady. Of loving her, of loving you. I thought I would be. But Elias's arms slipped around them both, creating a circle of warmth and belonging. But this feels right. Like maybe all our broken pieces fit together into something whole. She turned in his embrace, Grace secure between them. I'm not trying to replace Sarah, and I know you're not trying to replace Lucy. We're just building something new, something ours. His kiss, when it finally came, was gentle as morning, light. Grace patted their faces, babbling happily, completely unfazed by this new development in their family dynamic. When they broke apart, Elias rested his forehead against Clara's, his eyes suspiciously bright. I'm taking Grace to the refugee center tomorrow, he said. They're doing a holiday craft session. Come with us, not as my housemate or my friend, but as family, Clara finished. The word felt right, settling into place like the star ornament that had started this morning's revelations. Yes, I'd love that. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and new. Grace reached for the window, fascinated by the flakes swirling past. Elias picked up his camera, capturing the moment with practiced ease, his daughter's wonder, Clara's smile. The three of them reflected in the glass against a backdrop of winter white, creating new memories, new traditions, new love built on the foundation of all they'd lost and found again. The weather warning flashed across Clara's phone screen during her lunch break, its urgent red alert impossible to ignore. Historic winter storm approaching. Expected accumulation, 3 to 4 feet. Potential power outages. Travel impossible. Stock up on supplies. Seek shelter. Her first thought was of the refugee families Elias was photographing that afternoon, the Ahmads, living in a drafty rental on the edge of town. Their youngest was just a few months older than Grace. Her second thought was of another storm, another warning ignored, another family torn apart by winter's fury. She found herself dialing Elias's number before the fear could take root. He answered. On the first ring. I just saw it, he said, his voice tight with barely contained tension. I'm with the Ahmads now. Their heating system isn't up to code, Clara. They'll never make it through this storm here. Clara was already moving, gathering her things, alerting the school secretary. Bring them to the house, all of them. We have the basement family room, plenty of blankets. I'll stop for supplies on my way home. You're sure? The question carried more weight than simple logistics. They were still learning to navigate decisions as a unit, still finding the balance between independence and partnership. Completely. Sure, I'll pick up Grace from daycare too. Just focus on getting the Ahmads packed and transported safely. The grocery store was chaos, shelves already emptying as townspeople prepared for the siege of snow. Clara filled 2 carts methodically. Diapers, formula, shelf-stable milk, canned goods, batteries, flashlights. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Nature gives warnings for a reason, child. Only fools ignore them. She'd ignored. The warnings with David, the growing distance after Lucy's death, the silences that stretched longer each day until they snapped completely. She wouldn't make that mistake again. This time, she'd face the storm head-on, prepared and surrounded by people she loved. Grace was unusually quiet during the drive home, as if sensing the tension in the air. The baby's eyes tracked the dark clouds gathering over the mountains, her tiny fingers pressing against the car window. "It's okay, sweetheart," Clara murmured. "We've got this." They arrived home to find Elias helping the Ahmad family unload their minivan. Mrs. Ahmad clutched her youngest to her chest, while her two older children darted excited glances at the house. Mr. Ahmad stood slightly apart, his pride warring with necessity. "Welcome," Clara called, lifting Grace from her car seat. "Please come in before the snow starts. My home is your home." The words triggered something in Mrs. Ahmad's expression, recognition, perhaps, of another mother's understanding. She stepped forward, switching to English from her native Arabic. "You are too kind. We don't want to be burden." "You're not a burden," Clara assured her, leading the way inside. "You're helping us test our emergency plans. Think of it as a very important photo shoot, documenting Montana winter survival skills." This earned a laugh from Mr. Ahmad, easing some of the awkwardness. Soon they fell into a rhythm, bringing in supplies, arranging sleeping spaces, showing the children where to find extra blankets and snacks. Elias moved through it all with his camera, capturing moments of cooperation and connection that transcended language and culture. But Clara caught the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept tracking to the windows as the sky darkened prematurely. When they finally had a moment alone in the kitchen, he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I keep thinking about that night in the cabin," he whispered. "About how close we came to if you hadn't found us. But I did find you," she said firmly, pulling back to meet his gaze. "And now we're here, helping another family avoid that kind of danger. That's not coincidence, Elias. That's growth." The power flickered ominously, drawing nervous calls from the children. Through the kitchen window, they could see the first heavy flakes beginning to fall. The wind picked up, rattling the glass, carrying echoes of past storms and losses. "I should check the generator," Elias said, but his arms tightened around Clara instead. "I'm glad you're here, that we're facing this together." "Together," Clara echoed, the word a promise and a prayer. In the living room, they could hear Grace giggling with the Ahmad children, the universal language of play bridging gaps of age and culture. The sound anchored them, a reminder of why they'd chosen to open their hearts and home despite their scars. The storm was coming, but this time they weren't alone. This time they had built something stronger than their fears. A family forged from broken pieces, a love tested by loss and strengthened by choice. As the snow began to fall in earnest, Clara and Elias joined their guests, ready to weather whatever came next, together. The power went out just after midnight, plunging the house into darkness, broken only by the soft glow of emergency lanterns. Clara woke to the sound of wind howling through the eaves, and Grace's startled cry from the portable crib they'd set up in their room. Before she could move, Elias was already there, his silhouette familiar and comforting in the dim light. "I've got her," he murmured, lifting their daughter. "The generator's running, but I'm trying to conserve fuel. Heat set at minimum to keep the pipes from freezing." Clara slipped out of bed, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "I'll check on the Ahmads." The basement family room had better insulation, but she worried about their guests feeling isolated in the strange house. She found Mrs. Ahmad, Layla, already awake, nursing her youngest, while her other children slept deeply in their nest of blankets. The two women shared a quiet smile of understanding, the universal language of mothers, keeping watch in the dark. "Storm bad," Layla whispered, her English halting but determined, like first winter in Syria before. She trailed off, but Clara understood. Before the war, before they became refugees, before their lives changed forever. "Would you like some tea?" Clara offered. "We can heat water on the camping stove." Layla nodded, carefully settling her baby into the makeshift bassinet. They made their way upstairs, moving quietly past Mr. Ahmad. Karim, who had finally fallen asleep after spending hours helping Elias check windows and doors against the strengthening storm. In the kitchen, they worked in comfortable silence. their movements choreographed by necessity and shared purpose. The camping stove's small flame cast dancing shadows on the walls, reminiscent of other nights, other storms. Through the window, snow fell so heavily it seemed to erase the world. Beyond their shelter, your man, Layla said suddenly, measuring out tea leaves with practiced grace. He understands loss. I see in his eyes, like Karim after bombing when we lose our home. Clara's hands stilled on the kettle. Yes, his wife. There was an accident during another storm. Before I knew him, but you understand too. It wasn't. A question is why you help us. Why you open your home. Someone helped us once, Clara replied, thinking of that desperate night in the cabin, of choices made and lives changed. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person choosing to help, instead of looking away. The kitchen filled with the aromatic steam of mint tea, a scent that reminded Clara of the elementary school's International Food Festival, where she'd first met many of the refugee families. Above them, footsteps creaked softly as Elias paced, with Grace, his deep voice carrying faintly as he told their daughter stories to keep her calm. You love them, Layla observed, her eyes warm with wisdom. It's not easy loving after loss, takes much courage. Sometimes love finds you when you're not looking, Clara said, surprised by how easily the words came now. When you're just trying. To survive, to do the right thing. And then one day you realize that surviving has become living again. A particularly fierce gust rattled the windows, making them both jump. From upstairs came the sound of several small feet hurrying down the hallway, Layla's older children seeking their mother in the storm. Moments later, Elias appeared in the kitchen doorway, Grace snug against his chest, her eyes wide but curious. In the lantern light, room for a few more at this tea party, he asked, and Clara's heart swelled at how naturally he included everyone, how their home had expanded to hold not just their own healing family, but others in need of shelter. They ended up in the living room, all of them, as the storm raged outside. Karim joined them, drawn by the quiet conversation and warm tea. The children, no longer afraid, built a fort from spare blankets, while Grace watched in fascination. Elias documented it all with his camera, capturing the intimate moments of strangers. Becoming friends, of shelter becoming sanctuary. Tell story, Layla's oldest daughter asked Clara, holding out a book they'd brought from the basement. About snow. Clara settled onto the couch, making room for all the children to gather around. As she began to read, she felt Elias's arms slip around her shoulders, felt Grace's warm weight as their daughter reached for the book's bright pictures. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but in here, they had created something stronger. A web of connections, of shared humanity, of love that transcended language and loss. Once upon a time, Clara read, her voice steady and sure, in the deepest, darkest part of winter. The story unfurled like a map, leading them all toward morning, toward hope, toward the promise of clear skies and new beginnings that waited on the other side of every storm. The storm broke at dawn, leaving behind a world transformed. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. The power had returned an hour earlier, bringing with it the comforting hum of modern life, the furnace cycling on, the refrigerator's quiet buzz, the coffee maker's gentle percolation. Behind her, she could hear the Ahmads preparing to leave, their children's excited chatter mixing with Grace's morning babbling. The roads had been ploughed, declared safe for careful travel, and Karim was eager to check on their home. But something had shifted during those storm-bound hours, a bridge built between two families that couldn't be unmade. I'll have those photos ready for you next week, Elias was saying to Karim, his camera bag slung over one shoulder while he balanced Grace on his hip. The ones of the children in the blanket fort, those are something special. Not just photos, Karim replied, his English careful but heartfelt. Memories of kindness, of... He gestured around the kitchen, searching. for the word of home. Layla was pressing a container into Clara's hands. Warm flatbread, made this morning in Clara's kitchen, their cultures and lives already beginning to blend. "You visit soon," she insisted. "Bring little Grace. My Amira, she loved playing big." Sister, Clara hugged her, this woman who had become more than a refugee, more than a guest. "Soon," she promised. "And you'll come for dinner next week. I want to learn how to make that bread properly." After final hugs and waves, after watching the Ahmad's minivan carefully navigate the snow-packed driveway, Clara and Elias stood in the sudden quiet of their home. Grace, overtired from the excitement, had finally fallen asleep in her father's arms. "I should get her down for a proper nap," Elias said, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he stood looking at Clara with an expression that made her heart skip. "What?" she asked softly. "I've been trying to find the right moment," he said. "The perfect light, the perfect composition. That's what I do, you know. Frame everything just so." He shifted Grace gently, reaching into his camera bag with his free hand. "But I'm learning that sometimes the most beautiful moments aren't perfect. They're real." He pulled out a small photo album, bound in soft leather. "I made this during the storm while everyone was sleeping. It's not much, but..." Clara opened it with trembling fingers. The first photo was from that night in the hospital, when she'd found them in the cabin. Grace, tiny and pale in the NICU, Clara's hand reaching through the incubator window to touch her finger. She hadn't known Elias was photographing then. "Keep going," he encouraged. The pages told their story. Grace's first bath in Clara's sink, Clara grading papers with the baby asleep on her chest, their first attempts at solid foods that ended with sweet potato everywhere. Small moments, ordinary moments, sacred moments. And through them all, Clara could see herself through Elias's lens, not as a woman defined by loss, but as someone growing into joy, into love, into motherhood in all its messy glory. The final photo was from last night. Clara reading to the children in the blanket fort, Grace reaching for the book, everyone illuminated by lantern light. Below it, Elias had written, "Some families are born. Some families are chosen. Some families are built, one storm at a time." "Elias," she whispered, but he wasn't finished. "I've been carrying around Sarah's ring since the day I left Seattle," he said quietly. "Wearing it like armor, like a reminder of everything I'd lost. Yesterday, watching you with Grace, with the Ahmads, I finally understood. Love isn't a finite resource. It grows. It heals. It builds new rooms in your heart without tearing down the old ones." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I'm not asking for an answer now. I know we're still learning each other, still healing. But I want you to know that I'm ready to build something new, to choose joy over fear, to love you and Grace and whatever future we create together." The ring inside wasn't new, a vintage piece with a delicate sapphire that caught the morning light. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "A new start, but with roots in the past. Like us." Clara looked at the man before her, holding their sleeping daughter, offering his heart with such gentle courage. Through the window, sunlight sparked off fresh snow, creating diamonds from what had once been a storm's fury. "Yes," she said simply, watching his eyes light up with hope and love. "Yes to all of it." The social services report lay open on Clara's desk, its official letterhead stark against her students' colorful artwork. Ms. Hendricks, their caseworker, sat across from her, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed their situation. The meeting had been scheduled weeks ago, a routine check-in that now carried additional weight. "So," Ms. Hendricks said, looking up from her papers, "you and Mr. Hart are engaged." Her tone was neutral, professional, but Clara could hear the unspoken questions beneath it. Too soon, too risky, too much? "Yes," Clara replied, unconsciously touching the sapphire ring that already felt like part of her. "We know it might seem sudden to others, but nothing about your situation has been conventional," Ms. Hendricks finished, surprising Clara with a small smile. I've been doing this job for 27 years, Miss Munro. I've seen what desperate looks like, what rebound looks like. This, she gestured to the thick file before her, this looks like healing. Relief flooded through Clara, though she hadn't realized how much she'd needed this validation. Outside her classroom window, she could see Elias in the playground, photographing the refugee children's first experience with snow angels, while Grace watched from her stroller, bundled against the February chill. Still, Ms. Hendricks continued, there are practical matters we need to discuss. Grace's legal status, for one. Right now, you're officially her emergency foster placement. If you and Mr. Hart marry, we'll need to address guardianship options. Clara's throat tightened. They hadn't discussed this part yet, whether she would legally adopt Grace, whether it was too soon, whether it would feel like trying to replace Sarah. What would that process look like? It's complex, Ms. Hendricks admitted, but not impossible. Sarah Hart's parents would need to be notified, though they've had no contact since the funeral. And of course, there's your ex-husband. David? Clara blinked in surprise. What does he have to do with this? Your divorce was finalized less than 18 months ago. Some judges are conservative about allowing adoptions so soon after. Ms. Hendricks held up a hand as Clara began to protest. I'm not saying it's right, just that these are the realities we need to navigate. The classroom door opened and Elias entered with Grace, their cheeks pink from the cold. He read the atmosphere immediately, his smile fading slightly. Everything okay? Just reviewing next steps, Ms. Hendricks said, gathering her papers. You've built something remarkable here, all of you. My job is to help protect it, which sometimes means asking difficult questions. After she left, Clara and Elias sat together. At her small teacher's desk, Grace contentedly playing with blocks on her classroom mat. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching the diamond chips that flanked the sapphire on Clara's ring. Like stars guiding us home, Elias had said when he properly sized it for her. I should have thought about the legal complications, Elias said quietly, about what this means for Grace, for you. If it's too much... Stop, Clara interrupted, taking his hand. Do you remember what you said about love building new rooms? In your heart? Well, maybe family is like that too. It grows, changes, makes space for what's needed. But the adoption, your ex-husband, Sarah's parents... He squeezed her hand. I don't want to put you through more pain. Clara looked at Grace, who had abandoned her blocks to crawl toward them, determination written in every movement. Pain is part of life, she said softly. So is joy. I'm choosing both. I'm choosing us. Grace reached them, pulling herself up. On Clara's chair, Mama, she said clearly, for the first time. The world stopped. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes as she met Elias's shocked gaze. They'd never prompted Grace to call her that, had been letting their roles evolve naturally. But here it was. Validation from the person whose opinion mattered most. Elias lifted Grace into his lap, his voice rough with emotion. Well, that settles it, doesn't it? We'll figure out the paperwork, face whatever challenges come. Because this, he gestured to the three of them, squeezed together at the little desk. This is real. This is family. Through the classroom window, they could see Ms. Hendricks getting into her car, her file of their lives tucked under her arm. But their real story wasn't in those official reports. It was here, in a sunny classroom after hours, in a baby's first word, in the way love could surprise you with its timing, but never with its truth. Family, Clara echoed, leaning her head against Elias's shoulder as Grace patted both their faces with sticky fingers. Outside, the February sun transformed patches of melting snow into liquid gold, a reminder that even the deepest winter eventually yields to spring. The job offer came by courier on a mild March morning, delivered to Elias at the refugee center where he'd been documenting English language classes. National Geographic's letterhead gleamed at the top of the page, but it wasn't from Dave. This Time? It was from the magazine's main office in Washington, D.C., senior photography editor. Full-time position, prestigious salary, benefits, a chance to shape the magazine's visual direction for a new generation. Everything he'd dreamed of before Sarah's death, before the cabin, before Grace, before Clara. He sat in his truck reading and rereading the letter, watching through the windshield as winter's last patches of snow melted into spring mud. His phone buzzed, a text from Clara with a photo of Grace attempting to help with morning circle time at the elementary school, her little face serious as she mimicked the older children's hand gestures. The sight made his chest ache. Grace was walking now, a sturdy toddler with her mother's curls and his stubborn chin. She had favorite books, favorite songs, favorite ways to be held. She reached for Clara as naturally as she reached for him, her world expanding daily within. The safe boundaries they'd created together. The refugee story had garnered attention he hadn't expected. His intimate portraits of families rebuilding their lives, learning new customs while preserving their heritage, had struck a chord. But it was the accompanying essay he'd written about home, about choosing to stay, about finding strength in putting down roots, that had caught the editor's eye. "Your perspective on connection and community is exactly what we need," the letter read. "Your work demonstrates both technical excellence and deep human understanding." He drove home in a daze, the letter burning a hole in his jacket pocket. Clara's cottage, their cottage now, with the adoption paperwork finally moving forward, glowed warmly in the gathering dusk. Through the kitchen window, he could see them dancing, Clara holding Grace's hands while they twirled to some unheard music. The scene crystallized everything he stood to lose. "You're home early," Clara said when he entered, her smile fading as she read his expression. "What's wrong?" He handed her the letter wordlessly, taking Grace when she reached for him with an excited dada. Her weight in his arms felt like an anchor, keeping him grounded as Clara read. "Oh," she said finally, looking up with eyes that held too many emotions to name. This is incredible, Elias. It's everything you worked for." "Everything I used to work for," he corrected gently. "Before." Grace squirmed to be put down, toddling off to retrieve her favorite stuffed elephant. They watched her go, both acutely aware of how their decisions would shape her future. "We could make it work," Clara said, but her voice wavered. "D.C. has great schools. The refugee center could find another photographer. I could teach anywhere." "Stop," Elias said, moving to take her hands. "Please don't offer to uproot your life again. You built something here, something real, the kids at school, the refugee families, our home. But this is your dream," she insisted. "I won't be the reason you give it up. I won't be Sarah, asking you to choose between your passion and your family." The words hung between them, sharp and honest. Elias closed his eyes, feeling the weight of past and present pressing against his heart. When he opened them, Grace had returned, offering her elephant to Clara with imperious toddler determination. "That's just it," he said slowly, watching them together. "Sarah never asked me to choose. I always assumed I had to, that success meant climbing higher, reaching further. But what if success is this?" He gestured to their kitchen, where Grace's artwork hung beside his refugee portraits, where Clara's lesson plans shared space with his camera equipment. "What if it's building something that lasts? But the opportunity will come again," he finished, "or it won't. But I know now that no corner office, no prestigious title can compare to watching Grace grow up, to building a life with you, to using my camera to tell stories that matter right here." Clara set the elephant dancing across the counter, making Grace giggle. "Are you sure, really sure? Because I need you to be sure, Elias. I can't," she swallowed hard. "I can't watch another marriage fall apart because of unspoken resentment." He pulled her close, creating a family circle with Grace between them. "I've never been more sure of anything. Success isn't always about moving up. Sometimes it's about growing deeper, putting down roots strong enough to weather any storm." Through the window, the setting sun painted their kitchen in shades of possibility. Grace's elephant went on an adventure across the counter, guided by Clara's hands and accompanied by Elias's invented story. The letter sat forgotten, its prestigious letterhead unable to compete with the simple magic of a family finding its way home. The therapy journal sat open on Clara's lap, its pages filled with 18 months of grief, hope, and healing. Dr. Martinez, their family counselor, sat across from them in her sun-filled office, a gentle smile playing at her lips as she reviewed their progress. "When you first came to me," she said, "you were both so careful with each other, afraid to fully claim your happiness, as if it might dishonor your past losses." She closed her notebook. "Today, I see something different." Clara felt Elias's hand tighten around hers. They'd started therapy shortly after declining the Washington job, determined to build their relationship on a foundation stronger than shared grief and careful silences. "Last week," Dr. Martinez continued, "you mentioned the gallery opening, Elias. Tell me more about that." Elias shifted in his chair, still unused to discussing his successes. "The university's hosting an exhibition, Finding Home, American Stories. They want to feature the refugee series, but also," he glanced at Clara, "also the personal pieces, the ones about us." The images he meant were scattered throughout their house now, intimate black and white portraits of their evolving family. Grace learning to walk, Clara reading stories, morning light through kitchen windows, catching moments of ordinary grace. Alongside them hung photographs of Sarah, of Lucy's ultrasound, memories honored rather than hidden away. And Clara, Dr. Martinez turned to her. "The school board approved your proposal." "Yes," Clara smiled, thinking of the letter still posted on their refrigerator. "We're launching the program next fall, art therapy and ESL combined, using photography to help refugee children express their experiences." She squeezed Elias's hand. "We'll be working together, actually. The board loved that we could offer professional photography instruction alongside emotional support." "That's what I mean," Dr. Martinez said warmly. "You've stopped trying to build around your grief, and instead learned to build with it. Your losses are part of your foundation now, not walls keeping you separate." Through the office window, they could see Grace playing in the waiting room with Dr. Martinez's assistant. At 2 years old, she was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, equally comfortable chattering in English or Arabic, thanks to regular playdates with the Ahmad children. "We got the final adoption papers yesterday," Clara said softly. "Sarah's parents. They sent a letter with their approval. They want to meet Grace, to be grandparents in whatever way we're comfortable with. How did that feel?" Dr. Martinez asked, noting how Elias's posture remained relaxed at the mention of his former in-laws. "Right," he answered simply. "Grace should know all her family, all her history. Clara taught me that love multiplies. It doesn't divide. There's room for everyone who wants to help her grow." The session wound down with their usual homework, journal entries, date nights, continued open communication. But as they collected Grace and headed to the car, Clara felt the familiar wave of gratitude for how far they'd come. "The gallery called again," Elias said, as he buckled Grace into her car seat. "They want to know what I'm calling the exhibition section about us. What did you decide?" He pulled out his phone, showing her the draft of the exhibition placard. "Second Chances, a story of love after loss." Below the title was one of Clara's favorite images, their shadows on fresh snow. Grace between them, 3 figures merged into one by winter light. "It's perfect," she said, blinking back tears. "But you know what's funny? I don't think of us as a second chance anymore. We're just us, our chance, our story." They drove home through streets newly green with spring, past the elementary school, where their shared program would soon begin, past the refugee center where Elias still documented weekly English classes, past all the landmarks of their carefully built life. At home, Clara added a new entry to her therapy journal, while Elias photographed Grace helping to water the garden they'd planted together. The morning's mail had brought another letter from National Geographic. Not a job offer this time, but a request to feature their refugee program in an article about grassroots immigration support. Local story makes good, Elias had joked. But they both knew it was more than that. It was recognition that success could look different than expected, that sometimes the biggest dreams came true in small daily moments of choosing love, choosing family, choosing to stay. Through the window, Clara watched Grace scatter water droplets that caught the sun like diamonds, while Elias captured each moment of joy. Some might call it settling, this quiet life in a small Montana town, but Clara knew better. They hadn't settled. They had grown roots, deep and strong, nourished by the very losses that had once threatened to destroy them. The house deed felt heavy in Clara's hands, its crisp pages carrying the weight of permanence. The Victorian farmhouse on the outskirts of town hadn't been on the market long, a meant-to-be moment, their real estate agent had called it. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and most importantly a converted carriage house, perfect for Elias's photography studio. Previous owners kept horses, the agent was saying, leading them through sun-dappled rooms. But that outbuilding has great natural light, especially with those north-facing windows they added. Grace toddled ahead of them, fearlessly exploring her potential new home. Her dark curls bounced with each step, and Clara felt the familiar surge of love watching her daughter. Officially her daughter now, the adoption finalized last week, discover each new space. The kitchen needs updating, the agent continued, but the bones are good. And that breakfast nook would be perfect for a homework station when Grace starts school. Elias caught Clara's eye, sharing a private smile. They'd been discussing schools lately, imagining Grace's future. The elementary where Clara taught was just 10 minutes away, and their refugee program was set to launch in the fall. Everything was aligning with a symmetry that once would have frightened them with its perfection. There's something else, the agent said, leading them upstairs. The previous owners, they left something in one of the bedrooms, said it felt wrong to take it. She opened a door to reveal a hand-painted mural, a sweeping Montana landscape wrapped around all 4 walls, mountains and forests, and wildflower meadows rendered in soft, dreamy colors. Oh, Clara breathed, watching Grace press her small hands against painted flowers almost as big as she was. Their daughter was an artist, the agent explained, did this while fighting cancer. They said the room needs a new story now. Elias had his camera out, capturing Grace's wonder, but Clara could see the emotion in his eyes. They'd been talking about trying for another baby, about expanding their family once they found the right home. This room felt like a sign, a blessing, from a stranger who'd filled it with beauty, even in darkness. Later, after the agent left with their offer paperwork, they sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains in colors that matched the mural. Grace had finally worn herself out exploring and dozed in Elias's lap, her favorite elephant clutched tight. "I can see us here," Clara said softly. "Sunday mornings in that breakfast nook, summer evenings on this porch, holiday dinners with Sarah's parents and the Ahmads, maybe more little feet running up and down these stairs." Elias shifted Grace gently, pulling Clara closer with his free arm. "I can see it too. My studio full of natural light, your garden in that south-facing plot, a swing set in the backyard." He paused, pressing a kiss to her temple. Room to grow. They'd already begun the process of merging their lives completely. Clara's cottage was on the market, its rooms echoing with memories of their first months together. The cabin where Elias and Grace had nearly been lost to winter's fury would be donated to the refugee support program, transformed into a transitional housing option for newly arrived families. "Remember what you said about love building new rooms in your heart?" Clara asked, watching the first stars appear above the mountains. "I think that's what this house is. A physical manifestation of all those emotional spaces we've created. Room for our past, our present, our future. Room for everything." Elias agreed. "The hard memories, And the beautiful ones, the photographs of Sarah on the walls next to our wedding pictures, Lucy's memory box on a shelf beside Grace's baby albums. And new memories waiting to be made, Clara added, gently touching her belly, where their newest hope had taken root just 2 weeks ago, their secret still too precious to share. Grace stirred, blinking up at the darkening sky. "Home?" she asked, sleepily. "Soon, sweetheart," Clara promised, smoothing her daughter's wild curls. "Very soon." They sat there as evening settled over their future home, planning and dreaming. The carriage house would need insulation before winter. The kitchen wanted updating, the garden beds needed clearing. But they had time. They had each other. They had a foundation built on loss and love and conscious choices to stay, to grow, to believe in second chances and new beginnings. Above them, the stars emerged one by one, each a point of light in the gathering darkness, each a promise that even the longest night gave way to dawn. Just as their separate griefs had given way to shared joy, their broken pieces fitting together to create something stronger, more beautiful than either had imagined possible. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and crisp, autumn painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Clara stood at their bedroom window in the new house, watching early light transform the garden, where they would exchange vows in a few hours. The small bump of her pregnancy, now 4 months along, curved gently beneath her simple white dress. Soft knock at the door announced Layla's arrival. Over the past year, she had become more than a friend. She was family, the sister Clara had never had. "The flowers are perfect," Layla said, helping Clara with her hair. "And Grace, she practices her flower girl walk all morning, very serious about her job." Clara smiled, remembering their daughter's determined expression as she scattered petals across the living room floor for days, preparing for her important role. At 2.5, Grace understood that today was special, even if she didn't quite grasp why. Sarah's parents arrived early, Layla continued carefully, watching Clara's reflection. They helped set up chairs, bring baby pictures of Sarah to display with Lucy's memory box, just like you ask. Very, what is word? Gracious. Healing, Clara supplied, touching the sapphire ring that would soon be joined by a wedding band. "That's the word. All of this is healing." The decision to include both Sarah and Lucy in the ceremony had come naturally. Their love story hadn't begun in spite of past losses, but because of them, because grief had taught them both how to recognize and cherish joy when it appeared. A burst of laughter from downstairs drew them to the window. Elias was in the garden with Karim and Dave from National Geographic, setting up his camera equipment on a timer. He'd insisted on photographing their own wedding, wanting to capture their day through his unique lens. He looked up, catching Clara's eye, and the love in his expression made her breath catch. "Time for finishing touches," Layla announced, opening a small box. Inside lay a delicate necklace, a gift from Sarah's parents. The pendant held 3 small stones, a diamond for Sarah, a pearl for Lucy, and a sapphire for the baby Clara. Carried, past, present and future, linked together in precious harmony. The ceremony itself was intimate, just as they'd planned. Their garden, transformed by autumn colors and fairy lights, held only their closest friends and family. Grace led the procession down the petal-strewn aisle, taking her role so seriously that she placed each flower with careful precision, making everyone laugh softly. Clara walked alone, her bouquet combining late-blooming roses with mountain wildflowers. But when she reached the front, where Elias waited with tears in his eyes, she felt anything but alone. Their gathered loved ones represented every chapter of their story. The refugee families they'd helped, Clara's students past and present, Sarah's parents beaming with genuine joy, even David, who had found his own path to healing and come. To support their happiness, they had written their own vows, simple and true. "I choose you," Elias said, his voice steady and sure. "I choose our family, our home, our life together. I choose to honor the past while building our future. I choose love that grows, heals, and transforms. I choose you, Clara, every day, in all the small moments that make a life extraordinary. Clara's voice wavered only slightly as she responded. I choose you, Elias. I choose the way you see beauty in broken things, the way you teach Grace to find wonder in everyday moments. I choose our story, not in spite of its difficult chapters, but because of how they brought us here. I choose love that's brave enough to begin again, and I choose you as my partner in all that lies ahead. Grace, standing between them, offered up the rings with solemn importance. The simple gold bands carried engravings on their inner surfaces, not their wedding date, but the date Clara had found them in the cabin, the day their story truly began. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Elias's camera clicked away on its timer, capturing the moment from different angles. But the most precious image wasn't photographed, it was felt, in the way Grace hugged their legs, in the happy tears on Sarah's parents' faces, in the gentle flutter of their unborn child moving between them. Later, during the reception, Clara found Elias in his studio, changing camera memory cards. Having any regrets about not hiring a photographer? She teased. He pulled her close, one hand resting on her growing bump. Never. This way I get to see our wedding the same way I've seen our whole story, through the lens of love and hope and second chances. Through the window, they could see their guests mingling in the garden twilight. Grace danced with her grandparents while the Ahmad children wove between tables, collecting fallen leaves in autumn colors. Fairy lights twinkled like earthbound. Stars and the mountains stood sentinel against the darkening sky, unchanging witnesses to love's endless capacity for renewal. Second chances, Clara echoed, leading him back to their celebration. Or maybe just the chance we were always meant to find when we were ready to be brave enough to take it. The time capsule was Grace's idea, inspired by a project in Clara's third-grade class. For baby brother, she insisted, now a precocious 3-year-old with her father's artistic eye and her mother's nurturing heart. So he knows our whole story. On their first wedding anniversary, they gathered in the garden, where they'd exchanged vows exactly 1 year ago. 6-month-old Noah slept peacefully in his carrier while they spread their treasures on the picnic. Blanket, each item carefully chosen to tell their family's story. This first, Grace declared, holding up the worn baby blanket from the cabin. Elias caught Clara's eye over their daughter's head, both remembering that desperate night when a stranger's kindness had changed everything. The blanket had been cleaned and mended countless times, but they'd kept it as a reminder of where their journey began. Clara added Lucy's hospital bracelet and a photo of Sarah, these pieces of their past, no longer carrying the sharp edges of grief, but softened by time and love into precious memories. For Noah, she explained to Grace, so he knows about the angel sisters watching over him. Elias contributed a print from his refugee series, the one that had launched their family program at the school. The image showed the Ahmad children teaching Grace Arabic numbers during one of their weekly dinners, a moment of cultures bridging through the innocent wisdom of children. The program had grown beyond their expectations, with other schools in the state now adopting their model. My turn. Grace carefully placed her favorite elephant in the growing collection. The stuffed animal had been her constant companion through every major change in their family's life. Now it would serve as a symbol of childhood resilience and adaptability. Clara nestled their wedding invitation next to a family portrait taken just after Noah's birth. The photo captured them in their garden, autumn colors blazing behind them, Grace proudly holding her baby brother while their parents beamed with joy. Sarah's parents had taken the picture during their monthly visit, regular grandparent duties now shared easily between them and the Ahmads, who had become Noah's honorary grandparents as well. And this, Elias said softly, adding a small thumb, drive. Every important photo I've taken of our family, the day we met, Grace's first steps, our wedding, Noah's birth, all the moments that made us who we are. The last item was a letter, written together that morning. Clara read it aloud for Grace's benefit. Dear Noah, when you're old enough to understand this time capsule, you'll learn that families aren't just born. They can be built, chosen, crafted from love and loss and the courage to begin again. Your sister Grace taught us that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. Your angel sister Lucy and your guardian angel Sarah showed us that grief can become a foundation for joy. The Ahmads proved that family transcends blood and borders. And you, sweet boy, you're the promise that life always offers new chapters, new chances to love. Every item in this capsule tells part of our story. The blanket reminds us that sometimes we need help to survive winter's fury. The photos show how beauty can emerge from life's hardest moments. The elephant represents the comfort we find in each other. But the most important thing we want you to know is this. You were born into a family that chose each other every day in all the ways that matter. Love, Mama, Daddy, and Big Sister Grace. As they buried the time capsule beneath the apple tree they'd planted when Noah was born, Grace sprinkled wildflower seeds over the freshly turned earth. "For pretty," she explained seriously, "like Mama and Daddy's wedding." Noah woke then, demanding attention with his father's determination and his mother's timing. As Clara nursed him in the fading afternoon light, Elias set up his camera for a family photo. Grace arranged herself carefully beside Clara, one hand protectively on her brother's foot, the other clutching a fresh bouquet of garden flowers. "Perfect," Elias said, joining them after setting the timer, but he wasn't looking at the camera, he was looking at his family. At the life they'd built from broken pieces and brave choices. The camera caught them in natural light. Clara laughing. As Grace tucked flowers into her hair, Noah watching his sister with newborn fascination, Elias holding them all in his steady embrace. Behind them, the mountains stood unchanged, yet everything else had transformed. The garden bloomed where once there was only winter-hardened earth. The house glowed with warmth and life, and in their hearts, grief had not disappeared, but had made room for a joy deeper than they'd imagined possible. "Time for cake?" Grace asked hopefully, breaking the moment. "Time for cake," Clara agreed, sharing a smile with Elias. "And then stories. The cabin story." Grace bounced excitedly. It was her favorite now, the tale of how a broken man and his baby found shelter with a lonely teacher, how love could arrive in unexpected ways, how family could be born from the ashes of loss and bloom into something beautiful. "Yes, sweetie," Elias said, helping Clara to her feet. "We'll tell you the whole story. It's important to remember where we came from." "And where we're going," Clara finished, leading their family. Inside, toward cake and stories and all the chapters yet to come.